And good evening and welcome back to another week of Beyond. And with me as always is my wonderful co-host Beth. How's it going over there?
Howdy, howdy.
It's going. She's just smoking in here under the wire from her job, so she's a little winded, but that's okay. And so this week, for fun, because we Canadianed you all out last week, so now we're going hardcore USA. And we're going to talk about the Kent Hovind trial, which, trial number 2, of course, because he's already been sent up the river once, and now he's trying to do some weaselly things again. So with us tonight, we have a couple of awesome guests. We have Robert Beatty, who is a former employee of the IRS, which you will find out why that's important when we get into it. Hello, Robert.
Good evening.
And then we also have Dee Holmes, who is an attorney and works in sort of the IT business in finance, which you will also find out why that's important. Hello, Dee.
Hello.
And I will say I have your detailed bios are up on the YouTube page, so if anybody wants to know your specific credentials and such, that's all up there on the YouTube page. So good evening. So first of all, Robert, I'm just going to ask you because not everybody might know why Kent is in jail in the first place. Could you give us just a quick, as quick as you can, sort of reason why he's already sitting in jail?
He's had a long and storied career in tax evasion, and like a lot of tax cheats, the IRS tends to give him a long rope, but they finally caught up with him, and the specific charges that put him behind bars, so to speak, involved the failure to withhold and pay over income taxes and Social Security taxes on his employees, his structuring of financial transactions, and his obstruction of justice or impediment of IRS laws, right. 3 separate charges, of which he was unanimously convicted of all charges, and his wife was also convicted on the structuring charges. So she went to prison for a year, or got out a little less than a year, and Kent has been serving a 10-year sentence and is about to get his early out if he behaved himself this August. There's some rumors about he might have been out last month, but I'm not so sure that was ever definite. And
right.
Then he wound up filing hundreds of motions and all sorts of lawsuits and doing things to confound the government for daring to challenge him, and he finally crossed over the line and got the additional charges he's now facing, which include conspiracy, mail fraud, and contempt of court.
Lovely. So this is a big deal for him because he could be getting out and he could be going right back in before he even gets out, I guess. So, and just so people know, Kent Hovind is also known as Dr. Dino, and he is a creationist evangelist who had quite a bit of traction out there before he went to jail. And he's been in, how many years now, Robert?
A little over 8.
8 years, so
yeah,
that's a while.
Yeah, he's a young Earth creationist. And in his case, that is very, very important. Not as in his legal case, but in his overall worldview. Robert, can you explain what structuring is? Because people
In
might
the
not be aware what that actually is. And why is that important?
in the case of Kent Hovind, the structuring charge seems to be near and dear to their hearts and is a cornerstone of a lot of their rhetoric. And from the beginning, Kent Hovind and his people have misrepresented the law as it applies to his situation. You would think after 8 years in prison they'd at least get the law right, whether they agreed with it or not. But it appears they continue to falsely represent it. And as it applies to Kent Hovind's case, it basically is, and I have a proposition for discussion that I put to Kent's people and even to Kent dealing with this, but from memory it goes something like this. Withdrawing less than $10,000 in a single transaction with the intent to evade bank reporting requirements is a violation of the law, and it was the legal standard used in Kent's case to convict him, to charge him, try him, and convict him. He was withdrawing regularly less than $10,000 to avoid the bank reporting rules, and they used that to put him in jail.
Wow, and they
Okay, now can you explain what? Go ahead, Deb.
I was going to say they do that to prevent things like money laundering or funding, say, organized crime or terrorist enterprises, that sort of thing. Is that correct?
Well, it's used for all sorts of enforcement purposes, in my opinion. And one of the things Kent and his people do try to emphasize is that the law, which is, 40 years old or so, and it's gone through various changes over the years, they claim it was made for drug dealers, and Kent's not a drug dealer. But it was made for people. It was made for people who use the financial institutions in their criminal activities, and it includes Baptist preachers who cheat on their taxes.
Yep.
And although Kent wasn't criminally prosecuted for his personal income taxes, there is a personal income tax case involving Kent covering 5, 6, 7 years, which he became liable for $3 million or so in taxes plus penalties and interest that they typically do not like to talk much about. And included in that case was the civil fraud penalty.
Okay.
And I think some reports are he's never filed a personal income tax return.
Oh, gee.
He told the New York Times back in 2003, and I've got the page from the New York Times, that he had not filed a tax return in the last 30 years, which would pretty much put him, given his age, he would have never filed a tax return as an adult.
Wow. Now, and that goes a little bit towards his other philosophy that we find so fascinating, the sovereign citizen. Who wants to tell us what a sovereign citizen is?
Oh my God! I would love to tell you what a sovereign citizen is, because Kent Hovind that's the reason I care about Kent Hovind, is the sovereign citizen malarkey. That's what I like to call it, or nuttery, or whatever. Basically, and they're all over the map. Sovereign citizens think that they are somehow separate from the government. They call themselves original citizens, not 14th Amendment citizens. They think in some cases, and there's no central authority for these guys. You've got to make sure that they think that the only person who is really in charge in some cases is the sheriff. A good example of a sovereign citizen who got some prominence in the last year was that Cliven Bundy over in Nevada. He's a sovereign citizen, and he walks the walk and talks the talk, and he's very annoying, and we came really close to finding out how bad sovereign citizens could be one Saturday. So in Kent's case, I think his sovereign citizen activity is an outgrowth of his tax protesting.
Right.
I don't think it's. I mean, some sovereign citizens, it's because they're white. They were white supremacists, and this was their way of emphasizing their white supremacy.
Right.
Oddly enough, this has trickled into the black community, and it's now being used by people who call themselves Moors to try to avoid taxes and criminal charges, and like in burglary or robbery or whatever. It's all over the map. I mean, the average sovereign citizen is going to be someone who they may not pay taxes, they may not have a driver's license and say that they can travel over the roads because the Constitution lets them. They may not have a license plate on their car, or they may have a fake license plate on their car. They may have. I watched a video yesterday. This woman was crazy, but she basically called the 911 to complain that the police were following her, and she told them she wouldn't pull over unless they paid $300,000 to her first. That's a standard sovereign citizen thing. They will not bow to authority. They think they are the authority. I think that's probably the best way to put it. But they're all over the map, and let me tell you, none of their arguments work. I mean, that's the long, the short, and the middle of it.
Yeah, wow.
Well, what's so unpredictable with the sovereign citizen movement, like you said, they are all over the map. You could have something very simple, like you said, with the not having a license or not having a license plate. Then you can get very complex with the Cliven Bundy issue. And what makes Cliven Bundy so dangerous is that he's also tied into the militia movement. And what people don't realize is this actually started back in the 70s with the Posse Comitatus, which comes directly out of Christian identity movement.
Right. Those were the white supremacists that I was referring to, and which makes it kind of ironic that you have these people who call themselves Moors or Black Cherokees or whatever now going with sovereign citizen ideas, because I mean, people, don't you know that this came from a bunch of white supremacists?
What the thing about that is now the official Moorish temple has nothing to do with the sovereign citizens.
Correct.
Now, this is according to them. They have distanced themselves from these people that are calling themselves Moorish. And there's been a couple cases that I've posted about where they've claimed this Moorish I don't even know what the word I'm looking for. And they've combined it. What they've done is they've hijacked Native American tribes that no longer exist. There is one, I forgot what tribe he was with, but it is bizarre. I mean, you can have very simple or very complex.
Well, I mean, the woman asking for $300,000 before she stops for the police, like, whoa. I mean, up here, I can't even fathom that.
Though, the best one writing on sovereign citizenship and its implications is actually written by a Canadian judge in a divorce case. It's Meads versus Meads, and he calls it organized pseudological commercial activity. And it really is a very nice overview in about 168 pages of, how it got started in the United States, what it involves, and how it's gotten over to Canada. I mean, I hate to say it, we've exported another one of our crazy ideas to you guys up north.
We gave you Justin Bieber, though, so I guess it's okay.
I guess we're even.
And it's slowly making its way over to Europe, too.
Oh, boy.
But the most recent case that ended, if people want to look up, is Sharon Phillips. And that case is bizarre.
Actually, what's interesting is last week, and this was just a criminal trial, but there's one newspaper article about it in the Chicago Tribune that's worth looking up because it goes into quite a bit of detail. But this guy named El Bay was brought up on tax charges. and
Yes.
he was tried in the court of appeals judge Richard Posner. Posner normally writes these really biting opinions, and he doesn't take trials, but occasionally he does, and this is the trial he got. And it was interesting reading the account, but it was pure sovereign citizen nuttery, Jesuits, the Vatican, this, that. The judge was constantly having to admonish the jury. It was just a whole stew of crazy.
Wow. So my gathering from Hovind is the first time around he got convicted, and part of his punishment was he had to pay back a lot of money, and he had a lot of property confiscated as a part of that.
Well, let's set the stage here. Bob mentioned the structuring charges. Well,
yes.
And this is something that people get confused about, so I think it's important to make it clear what happened here. First, he was found guilty of the structuring charges. Then the jury had to go back in and decide that there was to be a forfeiture. So basically, the money that he structured, the $430,400, why on earth do I know this number? The jury had to decide whether he had to forfeit it or not, and the jury decided yes, it was forfeitable. Then the next finding, which took place in 2007, was that the Hovinds did not have the cash to pay it. Well, obviously they didn't, because if you look at the way they were doing it from 2000 to 2002, and they stopped in the middle of 2002, and apparently they were taking the money out to pay their ministry employees in cash. So they didn't have the money. But they did have 10 pieces of property, and the government went to the judge and said, so can we attach these properties in a couple of bank accounts and satisfy the debt that way? The judge in 2009 said, yes, you can do that. She put a limitation on it, though. You can only sell one piece of property at a time, and at the end, if you have a little bit left over and say 2 pieces that didn't get sold, you got to turn those back to the Hovinds. So for the last several years, the government has been trying to sell these properties. Interestingly, most of those properties have ended up in the hands of the Hovind children.
Of course.
One property that did not went to a guy named Anthony Jaworski, who bought it, I guess sight unseen, from the government. He lived in Maryland, and when he got down there to Pensacola and found out what was going on, I think that the poor guy was just absolutely taken aback, because he didn't realize that he was stepping into a hornet's nest buying this, I call it, holy ground of the Hovind family, and it was part of the trial. The discussion of the sale was part of the recent trial, and Jaworski did testify.
And I understand that he bought the property, and an associate of Hovind's came and told him he had to pay, basically rent to live there, even though he bought it.
Yes, it was, in fact, that was Paul Hansen, Hovind's co-conspirator in this case, and Paul Hansen wanted Jaworski to pay out $100 a day in gold in rent. And that's
I didn't know about the gold part.
Yes, in gold, in rent.
Just happened to have that laying around the garage,
And if you're a guy, you're not from Pensacola, you're just brand new, you're kind of an old dude, and you get this letter and it's addressed to Bob, because that's what you told. I think that's what Jaworski told Eric as a joke, Eric Hovind, and it shows up and it's addressed to Bob. You're going to be kind of flipped out.
Yeah.
And so in 2013, and this was about 2 years after Jaworski bought the property, Jaworski filed a suit in federal district court in D.C. to get his $100,000 back, because he wanted out of this deal.
Well, yeah.
Well, and unfortunately for Jaworski, that didn't go anywhere. It ended up getting dismissed. But he did get to testify at this trial. And again, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Robert, but I think he pretty much said on the stand that he still would like to get out from underneath this.
Yeah, I think he would not mind being able to move if he could find a buyer that would pay him as much or more than he had invested in it.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's also important to point out, in the context of what Dee said about how they came to forfeit that property, one of the Hovind sugar sticks these days is to point out the recent apology from the IRS regarding their policy on structuring enforcement,
Uh-huh.
which apparently involved catching people structuring and then going in directly and seizing the money and causing them trouble and
Oh,
that
the
sort of
asset
thing.
forfeiture.
That might have been a little heavy-handed on the part of the IRS, but it is not related to Kent Hovind's situation. It's a misrepresentation. In Kent
Mm-hmm.
Hovind's situation, as Dee said, they didn't go barging in, seize his money, and shut him down. It was long after the fact. They
Mm-hmm.
brought the charges, they got the indictment, they tried him, they convicted him, and the court ordered the forfeiture of the property.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not there. You know, the cases that these guys are talking about that the IRS apologized for, they appear to have been some heavy-handedness and maybe some violation of due process on the part of the IRS. But Kent Hovind got his due process in spades. He had his trial. He got convicted. The jury found that he, had to forfeit the money. The judge, issued an order in 2007 when they didn't have enough that they could find in the Hovind's name, and the government came back in 2009. And that's the other thing that I think we need to bring out here is that all of these properties, there was not a one of them that was actually in the name of the Hovinds. They weren't put, every single one of them was put in the name of the trust. So you had, like the Jaworski property was in the 5720 North Palafox Trust. There was a CSE trust. I mean, this was something that Kent's sovereign citizen guru, a guy named Glenn Stoll, had recommended.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah. I was reading some of the coverage on Robert's blog there earlier, and I laughed when Hovind was testifying that he'd taken a vow of poverty and he didn't actually own anything.
He's a Baptist. Come on. Baptists do not take vows of poverty. That's strictly a Catholic priest deal.
I know. I was like, what? That's pretty, a little hyperbolic there.
Yeah, well, he expected his believers, followers to believe that. His followers are an interesting bunch. I mean, I think that some of them are simply, I want to call them naive and uneducated. They like Kent Hovind when he came out to their churches and taught them creationism. And I have to admit, I've listened to a couple of his videos, at least until I start wanting to throw things out.
Dynamic.
He is extremely dynamic. I have to stop listening to him because the what do you want to call it? The half-truths and falsehoods get to me and I can't deal with it anymore. But he is extremely dynamic. He has these people in their hand. There's probably the most excitement these people have had in a while. And he has some fans that way. I think that's a lot of his followers. Then there are some that, like, I hesitate to mention his name, Rudy Davis, who are, they're hot-headed. They think that Hovind's being railroaded. It's really, really bad for them. He says things about the judge, calls her Jezebel, calls the prosecutor Jezebel, things like that. He's runs a mile a minute. He has a long history. Before he got hooked up with Kent Hovind, he was a Obama birther, and at one point there's a video of him peeing on a Quran and setting it afire. And he got a visit from the Secret Service when he said that he wanted to chop Obama's head off after he was convicted, of course. That's
the dude.
I'm surprised they haven't had a fatwa on the guy yet. Then.
Yeah, he's a guy from Texas that does this. And so he's got a few people around him, and they're all I think a bunch of hot air all talk, no action. And then there are a couple of guys who deserve mention because they're kind of like the past and the future of IRS activities against churches that do strange things. One guy is named Greg Dixon. He lost his church in Indianapolis. It was called Indianapolis Baptist Temple for failing to pay taxes on his employees. And so the IRS sued the church and seized it. And that was back around 2000 that it finally played out. And there was a standoff at the church that went on for so many days, and finally they ended up hauling people off in stretchers. And one thing you'll hear from his followers, from Dixon's followers and also Hovind's followers, is that the IRS tore down the church. Well, that's not true. The church property was sold to a charter school, and some of the buildings were torn down, but some of the buildings are in use by a charter school.
Yeah. There you go. I'm just going to pause for 1 second and welcome our special guest star, Miss Ashley. Hello.
Hey, everyone. I'm sorry I'm late coming in.
Yeah, well, you kind of had your own gig there to finish up, so I can understand that. So just quickly, we've got Dee here and Robert, and they're filling us all in on the wonderful hijinks of the Hovind trial.
Ooh.
Yeah, and the other person I wanted to mention in the same class of, the IRS past and future is Wiley Drake. He is the pastor of the First Baptist Church of, I want to say, Buena Vista or Buena something down in Orange County. Buena Park, okay. First Baptist Church of Buena Park, which looks to be kind of a little derelict, rundown property, and he's received letters from the IRS saying that he owes $50,000. He will not say exactly why, but I suspect that since he runs a homeless shelter out of there, that he's been treating his people like they were, giving them love offerings like Kent Hovind was doing, and basically not paying their their income taxes and Social Security. That's what I suspect. I don't have any proof, but I think that's the case.
I like that love offering. Yes, Robert.
Rudy Davis also once in a while will tell the story about how he's got a $25,000 bill from the IRS, and again, he gives no details as to what that is all about.
Right, and so he's basically saying, "Oh, I have this bill, but I'm exempt from that. I shouldn't have to pay it."
Yeah, I don't know what it is. There's also another interesting analogy that might be made between Greg Dixon of Indianapolis, now living comfortable retirement in Florida, and Kent Hovind, in that in both their cases, they bargained for a worst case result, and they got it.
Yeah.
The Greg Dixon fiasco amounted to so much that the court, again, ordered the property be taken. Just like in Kent's case. Had they gotten in compliance, they could have got out over the years for a lot less in no time. Dixon didn't go to jail, but Hovind did. But they could have got out for a lot less money.
Right.
Robert, you just kind of piqued something with me with this. They got out worse than if they would have just paid their fine and let it be. Do you think that, okay, going to the bakery issues, we won't bake a cake, and the most recent one being the lady who now is facing all these fines because she refuses to pay the $2,000 fine that she has, but fighting it, she's going to end up with probably over $250,000 just in legal fees. And they're making her out as a martyr, and that's being led by people like Alliance Defending Freedom. Are they tied into this at all? With these?
No, I think they're probably distinguishable to some extent. There are principles involved that I don't think I'd make the analogy on the bakery, but certainly if you look at could they got out cheap, yeah, bake the cake or bake the pie or something.
Yeah. Well,
But,
I'm just wondering if Alliance Defending Freedom, I'm using them as an example. I mean, there's Pacific Justice League and the Liberty Institute also is involved in these faux persecution cases, but they're not connected to Hovind in any way, are they? That you know of?
Not that I know of.
Okay.
Yeah,
I mean,
can I say something about that?
sure, go ahead.
You know, they have gone around, and this has mostly been a Rudy Davis thing, trying to find, Liberty, Liberty Lobby or whatever that outfit's named, or Jay Sekulo's outfit. Rudy
Right.
tried to get these people interested, and they weren't interested. And I think I know why. It is the sovereign citizen stuff. It's because Kent was not running his outfit as a 501c3. That's something you have to keep in mind. These people that are involved with him, the Wiley Drakes, the Greg Dixons, and there's also a guy named Chuck Baldwin who's up in Montana. They're like calling themselves the Unregistered Baptist Fellowship. Basically, they think they can do all this stuff and not be, quote, registered, unquote, with the government, so then they can preach politics from the pulpit and all this other stuff. But then they want the same tax exemptions everybody else has. As much as I might despise the Alliance Defending Freedom, and they are just up the road in Scottsdale, I really despise them, and but they are smart enough not to get involved in something that is weird. They are work with 501c3 churches, and as far as they go, that's their remit. There was a rumor last week, and it came from Rudy Davis, that John Whitehead's outfit, and I forget the name of it, Rutherford Institute. Yeah. Okay,
Yeah,
Rutherford Institute
yeah.
is going to get involved, but what happened was apparently Kent's Kent's attorney that was appointed for him, not pro bono, appointed attorney, basically turned it down and said he didn't want these people involved. And, probably a smart idea on the part of Kent's attorney. But, if Whitehead had gotten involved, I would have called him up and told him he was nuts. And, and given him example after example why you do not want to be involved with these sovereign citizen crazies.
I sent the Rutherford Institute an email about that, asking for a public statement, but didn't get a response.
That's too bad. I know I was reading on your blog there where Hovind was talking about, was a quote something about a 501c as a way to stifle the church, something like to that effect. So the sees it, like you say, they can't talk politics then, and so they're seeing that, well, that's just stifling our freedom, I guess.
Yeah, they have a real hate-on for LBJ. So for that reason, it's like, dude's dead. Just let it go, man.
Over the last few months, I think I've noticed some waffling or change of position as to what they want to claim about the Hovind family business.
Right.
At some point, not very long ago, they talked about it being a church, and no, it's not a church, it's a ministry. And now it seems like more and more they're trying to claim it's a church.
Yeah.
And that issue, I think, was dealt with in the original trial. And the investigation showed there just wasn't any way to factually determine that there's any church there, regardless of what they wanted to call it. And just calling it a church doesn't make it a church. And so they want to put that label on it and claim exemptions from the government for whatever they want, and yet they don't want the government to have the ability to determine whether or not they're actually a church. Take our word for it.
Of course.
Well, and something I think I put on the Facebook page today was talking about how, Kent talks about there being a church, and I don't think there ever was a, quote, church, unquote, that it was just a shell game that Glenn Stoll had suggested, because there's evidence all over the place that the family went and still goes to Marcus Point Baptist Church. And that's one of the problems that they had leading up to this trial, was that Kent had started preaching his anti-tax stuff, and he was basically barred from the pulpit at Marcus Point on the advice of David Gibbs III, who you may have heard of. He's a Christian attorney, handles homeschool cases, things like that. But the church had him as their attorney, and he recommended, no, don't let Kent Hovind into your pulpit. You may run into issues. And so Hovind was really upset. He set up a conference call between himself and Gibbs and Glenn Stoll, and I know I looked it up today. It's in volume 4 of the transcripts.
Oh Lord, those transcripts was
Wow.
I could have lived my entire life not knowing about this stuff, I think, but it's like Scientology. I could have lived my entire life not knowing about that, too.
Exactly. But then it sort of becomes like a train wreck, and you just gotta watch, I guess.
There's only about 2,000 pages to the transcripts of his previous trial and sentencing.
Yeah, just about.
I remember back in the day, though, Robert, maybe you can, when he used to lecture, and yes, I have seen him in person.
Oh my God.
Regretfully. I went to a Christian college, but they did teach real biology. And he used to call it a ministry. Now, calling something a ministry and being a, quote, church, is there a difference from a legal standpoint?
At times they did make the distinction they used to accept that it was not a church, it was a ministry, but again you get back to they think there's something magical about what you call it, that they can claim benefits from the government without having to show they're actually entitled to it. And one of the things I try to explain, which I think I'm correct on, is that if it's a church, it is by law exempt from asking for church status. It doesn't have to ask the government to say, you're a 501c3 church. They are a 501c3 church whether they ask for it or not.
Correct.
And
now, do they have to have a physical building?
No.
Well, there are generally 14 different factors which are subjectively evaluated in the church cases. And the courts, if it goes to court, look at those 14 different factors. Having a bricks and mortar place of worship is one of those factors. But if you're not a church, if you're a ministry, there's nothing special. You can call yourself whatever you want. But you have to ask for 501c3 status if you want the benefits, which is what Eric Hovind has done for his reconstituted family business.
Right.
And in fact, he had David Gibbs III, the same guy who testified against his father, do the paperwork, and they got that in 2012. I just wanted to interrupt. I'm looking on the Fogbo, and I'm not going to play it or anything because I'm not going to. It's Rudy. Apparently, he posted something at 8:18 local time, which would have been almost an hour ago, and it's the jury wishes to stay and finish their deliberations this evening.
Oh, good.
Well,
We might have
that on my Hovind page, and I think it's actually Gerald Barnes reporting. I suppose Rudy is still in the courthouse.
Oh, yeah. Well, see, I'm not even listening to it. I just saw it there, and it's like, oh, well, that's interesting. I'm looking at the Fogbo. So
I just listened to a little bit of it, trying to multitask somewhat here.
That's all right. Well, that's cool. I mean, that'd be neat if they actually came to a verdict in the next, hour and a half.
I also posted on my Hovind page just recently, from back in 2006, a report from P.Z. Myers, I think, noting that the first trial jury only took 3 hours to reach a verdict.
That's correct.
Maybe they'll have a quick verdict sometime tonight.
Yeah.
And basically this time around what he's done or has been accused of doing is kind of poisoning the well where it comes to trying to sell these properties. Is that accurate?
Yeah, what he did, and this goes back, I mean, it's all an outgrowth of the 2006 trial. What he did is he and Paul Hansen have basically been conniving together since, I guess, 2009, 2010, to try to keep the property out of the hands of people who aren't Hovinds. So what they do is put liens on the property, and at one point in 2012, Judge Margaret Casey Rogers issued an order dissolving the liens that Hansen had put on the property. This was not in the Kent Hovind and Joe Hovind case. It was in a separate case against CSE, the Creation Science Evangelism Trust, and some other trust properties. So she dissolved all that, said don't do it again or have anybody help you unless you come to me first. Did he go to Judge Margaret Casey Rogers and say, I would like to do this? Nope. He went ahead and he filed based on, I guess, I forget which Sally. It seems like every Sally that he has is a legal expert and can give him advice, but one of his Sally said, oh, you should file a lis pendens. Now, lis pendens is kind of a special thing. Basically, it is a lien, but it's a lien based on a pending lawsuit. So you're probably wondering, well, what was the lawsuit? Well, he had been incarcerated in South Carolina, and his box of documents hadn't shown up for 20 months, and he filed a Bivens case, which is a civil rights action, complaining that the Bureau of Prisons treated him abominably because he didn't have his box of documents, and he couldn't file his appeal with the Supreme Court. Of course, you need to know that at that point in time, the appeal had been filed to the Supreme Court a couple of years back and denied. So that was the basis, was the Bivens action. He was only using this as a vehicle, and the reason I can say that is because he let the case lapse, and it was dismissed by an appellate court this past January for failure to prosecute.
Well, there you go. But just enough so that he could say there was a lawsuit and file this other bit on the properties, because in his mind, I guess the properties were intertwined in the lawsuit because it was to do with his old case.
That's correct, and that's in his mind. He did not recognize the 2009 action, which took the property away from him, and for sale to the government. The government was supposed to sell it off piecemeal, and he didn't recognize that. He doesn't recognize really anything that's been going on here, and that's another thing with sovereign citizens. They may be in jail, but they don't recognize the authority. Paul Hansen talks a lot about jurisdiction. You do not have the jurisdiction to take me into custody. You do not have the jurisdiction to have, to do this, do that. It's really wacky stuff. I mean, it gets down to talking about, one of the things here is, as part of the mail fraud charges, is mailing a letter. Paul Hansen will argue that he can't tell you whether the letter that was mailed from Kent Hovind to whoever filed those things in Escambia County, the lis pendens, went across federal land, because he makes a distinction between federal land and everything else. And, in my mind, it's like you can't make that distinction. If it goes over a state line, it's a federal mail fraud case.
Yeah, hello. Wow. It's amazing the twisting and sort of mental gymnastics that they're trying to use to justify all this crap.
They're
and I'm worried about that.
What's that, Robert?
I said they're amazingly good at it. They spend a lot of time and effort perfecting their spiel, and if you just sit and listen to them, you can really be impressed. They can sound like that.
They sound like apologists.
Yeah, I was watching. You had put a video up on your blog, Robert, and I was watching it beforehand. And I know who Hovind is and such, but I'd never really watched him. And I thought, wow, he is a real smooth talker. That guy. If I didn't know. If I wasn't versed on my evolution, I might be sitting there going, oh, well, that can make some sense. And I can just imagine how he can be with all the legal maneuvering as well. If he's a silver-tongued devil, as they say.
What they, I think, fail to mention, which is the key, they rather misrepresent it, as they do everything. They talk about the charge of contempt being for mailing a letter.
Yeah.
It's not for mailing the letter. The lis pendens is a legal technique for people that are properly empowered by it. The contempt is for violating the court order.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that he used the mail to do it is incidental, and it comes up with a different charge.
The
so
mail
it's
fraud.
not about mailing a letter, it's about disobeying the court order.
Yeah. Because, I mean, nobody's going to really care if you mail a letter, but if you mail a letter that contains instructions to break the law, well, then you have a problem.
Well, Kim would argue that he's not bound by that. That he is just trying to protect his property, and that he had a legal and moral. He goes on about moral responsibility to let potential buyers know that this property was involved in litigation and they shouldn't get involved. Well, the judge wasn't buying that for a minute.
I love it, though. He turns it back on, well, I'm just trying to be the nice guy and warn these people that, they're buying something that's tied up in litigation, and like, really. And then his crony is charging that poor guy to live on his own land. Craziness. So Hovind had been on the stand the last couple of days, from what I understand, and what I found weird, Robert, was he went through and basically rehashed his whole first trial, and they let him do it.
Well, I think they wanted to give him enough rope to hang himself. His people think it was just heroic what he did, and that he stumped the prosecutors and the judge, who didn't know what to do, and so they let him talk and impress the jury. I'm not so sure that he impressed anybody, but with his ability to talk and hang himself.
His attorney, Thomas Keith, his appointed counsel, had filed a motion in limine, and this is normal in a criminal trial, not to bring up his previous convictions. He had to be sitting there and just absolutely grinding his teeth as Hovind went on and on, because he had filed this, the judge had approved it, and here Hovind is battling on about his previous convictions.
Yeah. That's, yeah.
There's something about a narcissist.
Yes.
Let's hope it does the job. Go for it, Beth.
I was going to say, do you, one of my biggest fears, and I'm going to refer to the Wesley Snipes case, is that, do you think the jury really understands what really is going on? Because, in the Wesley Snipes case, he was not found, and this is something I commented on when you posted, is that reading through, and I did read through Wesley Snipes' transcript, is that he was found guilty on some things, but they didn't think that he did it willfully. Mm-hmm. And one of the things you had brought up in the article was that the guy that wrote the article seemed to be kind of awestruck with Hovind, in the sense that they said the issue is whether Hansen and Hovind were willfully breaking the law, not whether they were correct in their filings. Particularly when it comes to Hansen, it sounds reminiscent of the defense that Erwin Schiff, who is a prior tax protester that seems to be the god of all tax protesters.
He's still in prison.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and that's the funny thing. And I said, okay, riddle me this. How could anyone even remotely hold that Hovind or Hansen didn't know they were willfully breaking the law? If they were following Schiff, and Schiff is still in prison, then they know that it's wrong.
That's an interesting argument. I don't know how that's going to work. You mentioned earlier about how much the jury understood.
Yeah.
without having sat there and listened to the jury, I have to wonder myself. But then again, from reading the transcript of Kent and Joe's first trial, that got pretty much in the weeds as far as some of the things like structuring, and they still returned a guilty verdict on all those counts of structuring, and I was kind of surprised about that. Just reading through the transcript, because it could get pretty deep in the weeds, but they seemed to know what they were doing. So I'm not, I think the jury could probably, sort through it and maybe bring back an entire guilty verdict. I will say this though. Guilty, innocent, or mixed verdict, Kent Hovind is not going away as far as his court is concerned. I mean, if he's innocent, he is still going to file papers to try to get those 4 parcels back. If he's guilty, he's going to file papers to get those 4 parcels back. He has said that he will be pursuing Scott Schneider. He's the IRS agent that's been tailing Hovind for the last, 14 years or so.
Is that how long it's been going on? Wow.
Since at least 2002 and probably before.
Wow.
Yeah, he said he was going to tail Hovind. I mean, Hovind said he was going to tail him for the rest of his life. He really has a hate on for Scott Schneider, and so same with Judge Rogers. He really hates her too. I mean, he says terrible things about Judge Rogers. Just horrible things.
They call it paper terrorism for a reason.
Yes, and that's what I was getting to.
Kent and Paul Hansen, and even the old Sally from New Hampshire, Otis Alexander Matthews, who put him onto the list pendants apparently, are famous for filing paper, and they don't intend to quit, and it's right out of the Sovereign Citizen Playbook.
Yes.
They're going to file papers. They know what they're doing, and it's to frustrate the order of things, and they win points on that tactic. And Kent has pledged himself, even in this case, to spend the rest of his life filing papers because the government dared to challenge him, and he can't stand that he doesn't get to make up the rules.
That's a bit of a vendetta and a half.
It's really kind of amazing because Kent puts himself off as being this great Christian, and he wants to bring everybody to Jesus, and I don't recall Jesus saying anything about, harass your enemies into the ground. I do seem to recall some stuff about turn the other cheek. But Kent's God, I think, is the vengeful Old Testament God of Genesis more than anything else.
I'm thinking. Let's take a quick break, and we have a preview from Beth's Havoc and Chaos for a few minutes, and then we'll come back and talk more about Kent Hovind's craziness. So just give me a second here. I share my screen so that everybody can see the video. And here we go. Eventually. There. Come on. Technology's grand, isn't it? One of these days my computer will listen to me when I want it to.
That would take all the fun out of it.
I know.
Equipment issues.
Yes, equipment issues. Oh, no, that's not what I wanted. Dang. See, it's I'm being persecuted or something. That must be it.
Oh no, full persecution.
It was all that bad talk.
That's right. There we go.
Greetings, and welcome to What Pisses Me Off This Week. Nothing specific has brought this diatribe about, just some casual observations concerning discussions of historical documents and their role in history. In fact, I'm using a blog post I wrote about a year or so ago as the basis. So, for this week, you are safe for the moment, as there is no pseudoscience. But there is some pseudo-history going on. And Just a reminder, I do use colorful language, although this week you might be safe. My interest in the Mayflower Compact began with the In God We Trust debacle. Kind of long story, but the gist is legislators trying to push the Christian nation idea. It's still happening, and they won't give up. One of the canards they use when speaking of the In God We Trust and the whole belief of the United States as a Christian nation is referring back to documents and or events they believe support their view while discounting others. One is the Mayflower Compact, signed in 1620.
In the name of God, Amen. We, whose names are underwritten, the loyal subjects of our dread sovereign Lord King James, by the grace of God, of Great Britain, France, and Ireland, King, Defender of the Faith, etc., having undertaken, for the glory of God and advancements of the Christian faith and honor of our King and country, a voyage to plant the first colony in the northern parts of Virginia, do by these presents, solemnly and mutually, in the presence of God and one another, covenant and combine ourselves together into a civil body politic for our better ordering and preservation and furtherance of the ends aforesaid, and by virtue hereof to enact, constitute, and frame such just and equal laws, ordinances, acts, constitutions, and offices from time to time, as shall be thought most meet and convenient for the general good of the colony, unto which we promise all due submission and obedience. In witness whereof, we have hereunto subscribed our names at Cape Cod, the 11th of November, in the year of the reign of our sovereign Lord King James, of England, France, and Ireland, the 18th, and of Scotland, the 54th, in the year of our Lord, 1620.
While the proponents of a Christian nation focus on the opening lines of the second paragraph, having undertaken for the glory of God and advancement of the Christian nation, they ignore the remainder of the document and the history surrounding it. An excellent example of this can be seen heard in the video attached to the show notes. It starts at 32:22 mark. The sentiment being expressed is that of Dr. Ron Beatty. He's from Return America. In other words, they revise history to suit their needs and advance their agenda.
And in the Mayflower Compact, they said they came to the shores of this world to advance the Christian faith. Let's get that again. They came to the shores of this country to advance the Christian faith.
The Mayflower Compact is often cited as one of the foundations of the Constitution. Some agree with this sentiment, some do not. I tend to lead towards the is not camp, although I really don't have particularly strong reasons to do so other than the differences between the two time periods and the individuals involved in writing the documents. The story begins with the separatist pilgrims in England, also called the Saints, Protestants who did not recognize the authority of the Anglican Church and formed their own Puritan Church. To escape persecution and possibly imprisonment, they fled England for Holland, eventually deciding to create their own colony in the New World. What many are not aware of, myself included, the Mayflower passengers were not all separatists. Of the 102 passengers, 61 were common people, merchants, craftsmen, skilled workers, indentured servants, and several young orphans. As the Pilgrims called them, strangers. Arriving in the New World, the Mayflower didn't quite make it to Virginia, and they ended up off the shores of Cape Cod, an area outside the jurisdiction of the Virginia Company, the landowners the Pilgrims were beholden to. Therefore, its rules and regulations no longer applied. Dissent arose between the Pilgrims and other settlers, and out of that dissent came the Mayflower Compact, a social contract whereby the 41 men who signed it agreed to abide by the new government's laws in exchange for shared protection. William Bradford describes the growing discontent in Morse Relations, a journal of the Pilgrims at Plymouth, 1622, as follows.
This day, before we came to harbor, observing some not well affected to unity and concord, but gave some appearance of faction. It was thought good there should be an association and agreement, that we should combine together in one body, and to submit to such government and governors as we should by common consent agree to make and choose.
The compact, by design and by inspiration of Pastor John Robinson, head of the church in Leiden, created a separation of church from state and equality. What is interesting to note that these concepts were penned by Robinson in 1620, prior to the departure of the Pilgrims. On August 5th of that year, John Carver read those words, which included the ideas of the body politic, etc. Every adult male, pilgrim and stranger, had to sign the agreement before stepping foot on land. The Mayflower Compact was an attempt to establish a temporary, legally binding form of self-government, and remained in effect until 1621 Pierce Patent. Plymouth was eventually incorporated, then absorbed into the Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1691. So much for a brief history, and yes, that summary is devoid of numerous minutiae, but it'll serve our purpose for now. It is my opinion what the Christian nation proponents fail to recognize when citing the Mayflower Compact is that the men of the Mayflower were undereducated. Here's an example of one such discussion. What is important to note here is that the framers of this compact understood that there was a significant difference between a covenant and a constitution. In the former case of a covenant, they referred to it in order to combine themselves together into a civil body. A constitution, however, and laws which flowed from it did not combine them into a civil body, but instead organized that previously combined civil body in such a manner and in such a fashion as most meet and convenient for the general good of the colony. Hello, McFly? You do realize that these travelers were not lawyers. They were not politicians or trained clergy. These were lay people. Simple folk with a common goal. William Brewster, often cited as the only passenger with advanced education, is believed to be the primary writer of the document along with William Bradford. The dire straits forced these men to use their wits to prevent an all-out mutiny. All they had as a model were the written agreements used by the Pilgrims to establish their separatist churches in England and Holland. So, is it any surprise of the language used? I highly doubt that they discussed the differences between a covenant and a constitution. The pattern of church self-government served as a model for political self-government in the Mayflower Compact. It is an adaptation of a Puritan church covenant to a civil situation. Instead of focusing on the inactive clauses of the document, which Christian nation proponents do, all one needs the active part of the agreement. Think of it as a modern-day business letter. Your first paragraph introduces who you are and why you're writing. The body of the letter is the meat of the matter. It tells us what is important. A covenant whereby the settlers would subordinate their rights to follow laws passed by the government to ensure protection and survival is what made it unique of a document. Not having undertaken for the glory of God, yada, yada, yada. To deny the importance of the Mayflower Compact would be foolhardy. It was the foundational document for the Plymouth colony. The compact, with its fundamental principles of self-government and common consent, has been interpreted as an important step in the evolution of democratic government in America. But it ends there. It was not, however, the establishment of a Christian nation. It was not the establishment of a theocratic government. It was the recognition that people of different religious beliefs could live in tolerance side by side while working for the good of the whole. It was recognition of the concept of a government of the people and by the people, with the individuals within the group being treated as equal. The meaning of those words that principally resonate today is this: we're all in the same boat. And now, ponder that for a few moments while we return to the show.
And I see our good friend Dave Foda has snuck in while we weren't looking. Hello, Dave. Or he's back on mute now.
Hey, sorry about that.
That's okay.
There's another update that's been posted about 30 minutes or so ago.
Oh, do tell, Robert.
And I just listened to a short first minute of it, and they indicated that there might be a chance they're going to spend the night in the hotel and come back in the morning.
Oh, good. I'm actually pleased to think that they may be staying in a hotel because of something you posted earlier today on the Facebook page, Bob, about how some of the protesters for Ken were praying loudly outside the courthouse. That to me was like, you guys, jury tampering, hello.
Yeah, I read that too.
I got the impression that some of that was going on in the courtroom. I didn't read it that close, but I got the impression some of it was going on in the courtroom that was maybe bothering the jury.
Well, I can't imagine that it was going on in the courtroom because judges tend to be pretty, and federal judges even worse, about noise in their courtrooms.
Yeah. That's crazy, though. That I was saying that to Robert before we started. They'd let these guys stand out there basically yelling prayers out to try and influence the jury. That's not too bright.
I'd have to go back and reread it. It might have been during breaks or something, or I might have just misread it. But I thought it was stuff going on in the courthouse where the jury might have been affected by it.
Well, didn't I read somewhere that they even prevented a court worker from entering because they thought she was a jury member? That's crazy.
I don't understand. I mean, it's like, why would you do something like that? Because if this had gotten out of hand in a real way, that could have led to a mistrial, and then we'd be doing this all over again in 2 months.
Exactly.
I think the judge is trying to keep that from happening, and some of those incidents that were reported apparently are what caused the judge to amend her order and sequester the jury during meals, and if they went out, they would go out in a group escorted by the marshals.
Yeah, I mean,
that almost seems to me the actions of Hovind's supporters. It almost indicates to me that they are unconcerned with the facts. They know that Hovind is in the wrong. They know that Hovind is going to lose, and I think that Hovind's attorney knows that too, which is why he took the defense tactic that he took today with Hovind on the stand and just let Hovind go on and on and on about completely irrelevant stuff, to try and wear down the jury, because he knows that if it's tried only on the merits of the case, Hovind is going to lose, so he's got to fill it up with a whole lot of other crap.
Well, Hovind has been prophesying for a long time that he's going to lose because 98% of the cases are won by the government. There's a good reason for that, and the reason Hovind might lose is not because of that, it's because he's guilty. He time his people for a loss, and Jerry Rose, I think that's his name, one of his early on supporters that I haven't heard much of lately, hold
on. Is Jerry Rose the guy who also does videos on Rudy Davis' channel?
He's got a YouTube channel of his own. Some of them Rudy Davis has posted, but Jerry Rose, I think, is a member of the Armed Services Army down in Texas. He went to visit Hovind at one time with Rudy Davis, but he as much as told me that he doesn't care about the facts or the law. He likes Kent Hovind, and he thinks 8 years is enough. And that's, I think, what you're talking about, is they don't care. And it's all about the New World Order and all those other conspiracies.
Oh, Lord.
Interesting thing about Jerry Rose here, he's the guy who cries like John Boehner. He does this on videos. If you watch his videos, after there's one in particular that stands out in my mind. He hung up the phone well, Hovind got cut off because he was getting ready to run over on his prison telephone card or whatever it was. And after they hung up, there was this few minutes where Jerry Rose was talking, and then all of a sudden he just broke down in tears, and he's trying to do this video while he's crying because he's so sorry and he's so upset about this, all these problems that Hovind is having, and Hovind is such a good guy and everything else, and I'm just sitting here thinking to myself, you fucking pussy.
Well, I think Rudy and Jerry and so many of these people, where were they during the first 7.5 years of Kent's imprisonment? You never saw them. They're new to the game because of these new charges. The public relations has been a little better, and you're getting a lot of new people coming in of the soft sit variety, and they're making a big deal out of it. And for the most part, other than promoting their conspiracy theories and all that stuff, they don't know what they're talking about.
How many, quote, supporters does he have that, if the news were covering it more
4.
than they are?
And one dog.
Okay.
One dog.
That's what I mean, I knew it wasn't very many, but because
Well,
I know he tried to reach out to some Congress people saying, "Oh, I got all these supporters in high places, and they're gonna pass laws." So this was just like a week ago, and I'm thinking, dude, you're delusional.
Supporters in high places, does that mean the next tier up in the prison?
I would suspect that he probably has maybe a core group of a dozen or so, and then maybe a surrounding group, and these would be the people that came to the trial or picketed outside the courthouse, maybe 50 or 60. And then there's a whole amorphous mass of people. These are the ones that went to his church, or not his churches, but went to the churches that held Hovind seminars, things like that. And, those number in the hundreds, and they're, or maybe even in the thousands. And I'll tell you how I know that, because if you look every single day, somebody is reposting his videos to YouTube. I do searches every day to figure out what's going on in the Hovind world, and that's, people repost this stuff. It's old. I mean, he had, some of these videos date from the late 90s, but they love him. I mean, it's really kind of amazing. I don't know that I want to call it a cult, but maybe it's a cult personality.
It sounds pretty darn cultish.
Yeah.
I just got a note on my Facebook page from Danielle Hovind. I think that's Kent A. Hovind's wife.
Yeah.
Indicating they have sent the jury home for the night.
Ah. So they let them out. Let's hope they don't have random people praying under their bedroom windows.
This would be a heck of a jury to serve on. I mean, we had just had the Jodi Arias nightmare end here in Phoenix, and I can't even imagine, with that, it being worse, even though people were pretty upset about what happened. But you don't have a bunch of fanatical Bible thumpers who are just absolutely convinced that Kent, they really honest to God believe that Kent is God's man. I've had people sit there and say, touch not mine anointed and all that. And my response is, touch not mine anointed is a really great thing to pull out of the Bible to excuse all sorts of abuse. And so just, cut that out.
Exactly. Something tells me the Catholics have been using that one for a while.
Yeah, well, it bothers me incredibly that people are that, I don't know. I mean, there are people, they had people who had come down from Virginia. I mean, of course, Rudy, he's taken he's taken 6 months off of work. Is that something like that?
Wow.
Why is he taking 6 months off of work?
No clue. Maybe, I don't know.
He needs time.
I
He needs time to grieve if it doesn't go his way or something.
I took time off for the OJ trial, but what was that? 3 weeks? I couldn't
Yeah.
imagine. Well, yeah, I could because I can be pretty obsessive about things, but wow.
I think it goes to what Kent accused me of doing in the long ago, and that was trying to ride his coattails into the Hall of Fame. Rudy has
Yeah.
found
Oh,
the
that's a good.
project, and he's
Right,
playing it for all it's worth.
because Robert's career has been all about Kent Hovind and nothing else.
I remember that, Rob. That was.
God.
Rudy is doing what I got accused of.
Yep. Yeah,
And-
that's a good point.
And Rudy is doing it very well.
I can tell. I can tell
Bob,
you.
do you think that Rudy is behind that freakinhoven.com site?
Well, I think his wife is closely related to what goes on there, but I think another anonymous fellow by the name of uses the ID of Racer X is the power behind it. He's been mentioned in some and featured on some of the videos, and from what I recall hearing, he's identified himself as owning that page.
There was a Robert. You had posted a link to one of the telephone calls on my page.
Oh yeah.
And there was something. This was Kent talking with Rudy, and there was this whole deal about where Kent immediately launched into who Rudy needs to talk to about the websites and about other kinds of things, and it wasn't even a phone call that Rudy could really use for his channel. It was just Kent giving direction, and I think one of them had to do with the Free Kent Hovind website. Do you remember that? Do you remember that call?
No, I don't recall any specifics about it. There's been so many that we've taken note of. But Kent really does, I think, enjoy his throne in the Santa Rosa jail. He gets to sit there and spend his time on the phone, and he's got his minions loving to take his orders and jump and fetch and do all that sort of thing. And it's very consistent with, I think, his narcissistic personality disorder. And he's loving it.
You know what, Robert? I was thinking earlier today about this, and I figured that you were going to bring that up. I was thinking that I was probably going to say something like he was nuts, and that you would come out with the narcissistic personality disorder line, and I was thinking, well, yeah, but that doesn't change anything. That just delineates what flavor of nuts he is. He's still nuts.
I think it helps explain some of his behavior, and the reason I do that, one reason, is because one of Schiff's co-conspirator, one of them, the Lawrence Cohan, who was convicted along with him, tried to introduce evidence of his narcissistic personality disorder in the lower level court, and they didn't want to hear it. He appealed that, and the appeals court said, we're going to overturn your conviction. They should have at least listened to that testimony. Not that it would have excused his criminal behavior, but it might have helped explain it. And so I've been asking or proposing that Kent could use a mental evaluation. He may have one or more mental issues that should be diagnosed, but nobody seems to care.
But that would be a political problem for Kent, though, if he did that.
No kidding.
I mean, he would basically lose his ecclesiastical credibility if he did that.
Well, that's the problem. He's not going to ask for one. His lawyer's not going to ask for one, and the prosecution's probably not either. So it's just a suggestion I think would be doing good if anybody was seriously concerned about his well-being, like his family, who is sitting silent in secret and trying
Except
to
for Eric.
avoid the issues.
Except
You know,
for
that's
Eric.
interesting about his family. You know, they're all there in Pensacola, with the exception of Eric testifying. We haven't seen any of them. You would think, I mean, if Joe and if Joe was the loving wife, you know, how those independent fundamental Baptists, you know, really pushed the wives to be subservient to their husbands, you'd think that Joe would have showed up the trial to, you know, at the trial to wave the colors and be the loving wife. And as far as I know, Joe did not put in an appearance. And, you know, I have to wonder if she's really kind of pissed off at him. I would be.
But even Ernie Land has pointed out that Joe had some very unpleasant experiences in her time behind bars, or at least in the low security prison, and that she apparently is, whether reasonably or not, fearful of ever having to go back. And I think she may need more help than Kent and may or may not be getting it. And that's why she is being kept under wraps. She certainly has an important story to tell, which should be told, but we may never get to hear it.
Yeah, I'm sure her experience was not Orange is the New Black, and prison is not Orange is the New Black. And that's something else that really needs to be emphasized. If Kent had even made an effort to, you know, after his conviction, to settle with the IRS or at least set up a payment plan or something like that, it's entirely likely that Joe might not have spent any time in jail.
I don't think she would have if he had been what he claims to be.
Yeah, and
Here's another thing though. Now, the whole thing that started this mess, we wouldn't even have these lease pendants filings had it not been for the structuring charges that resulted in the previous trial.
Right.
So, here's my question. Let's say somebody takes $10,000 or more. They withdraw $10,000 or more out of an account. This is supposed to be reported to the IRS. Now, what are the drawbacks, if any, to reporting that to the IRS? Basically, what you're doing is, as far as I know, you're just saying, hey guys, I'm taking out $11,000, $12,000 from this account. This is the reason why.
Well, you don't even have to give a reason, because the banks are the ones that report it, and banks have pretty sophisticated algorithms, because I work for a bank, okay? Banks have algorithms, and it's part of know your customer. Banks basically have to be on the watch. They've been tasked by Homeland Security and all these laws recently to be the warning dogs of, you know, hey, this is kind of some weird stuff going on with this account, or it looks like these guys may be sending money to Syria or whatever. And so the reporting is actually done by the bank. It's not done by the individual.
Okay, so but the question I have is, what is there a negative impact to the consumer or to the account holder with the bank for having this report sent to the IRS? I mean, we're not talking about any money change. We're not talking about a filing fee or anything, are we?
Here's what I would say about that, Dave. For the legitimate businessman or individual, it doesn't make much difference. They might get a call from the IRS sometime and ask them about it, and if everything's in order, it's no big deal. Maybe a little inconvenience. But for a person like Kent, who was running $1 million or more through his bank account a year and not reporting it anywhere, to get reports like that to the IRS could be a big red flag that says somebody's not paying tax on this money. And so he was, in part of his scheme, is to take out less than $10,000, so there was no report filed.
Right.
And that's against the law.
Okay, that makes sense, Robert. Thank you for that.
Excellent. So we've got. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Doug. Well, I was going to
No,
say,
you go-
where does Eric sit in all this?
Oh, good question.
Well, I'd like to hear more from Eric. He's been rather coy in his limited appearances. I think Dave referred to politics earlier, and I think Eric is really concerned about the politics and what it's going to do to the family business income stream.
You know, you might have a point there, because isn't Eric and his particular organization coming out with a movie very soon?
They've got a 3D movie project, which is
Yeah.
kind of like Ken Ham's art project. I don't know if they'll ever make it into a movie or not, but it's a fundraiser for now.
Yeah, this trial could kind of damage his chances at selling that, particularly when most other creationists reject Kent Hovind's brand of creationism. And I think I read somewhere recently that even Eric disagrees with his father on certain things.
Oh, wow.
Yes,
Well,
and I
now-
think one of the other things to note here is that Eric's got now controlling the base as far as the business is concerned.
Mm-hmm.
And you might remember, Dave, that when Eric was more chummy with Cy Ten Bruggencate,
That's where I was going.
Yeah, some of Eric's people were concerned, what are you doing associating with that guy? Well, you can imagine what some of Eric's people are going to think about who Kent is associating with these days.
Mm.
Now,
By the way, Cy just lives down the road from me. You guys can have him too if you like.
No, thank you.
No, you already gave us Bieber. We don't want that jackass too.
We had that discussion already. What was that, Beth? Go ahead.
I was going to say, is Eric's, quote, business, is that completely separate, different from Kent's, or is it a continuation?
I think they're now completely separate. However,
Okay.
I've been curious in that Eric has at times mentioned a prison ministry, and I'm wondering if he isn't still sending money to his dad under the guise of doing prison work.
Okay, here's a question. Why a prison ministry? I mean, seriously, if you look at the stats, virtually 98% or 97% of the people who are in American prisons are already identify as Christian. So what's the purpose of a prison ministry?
But they're not fundamentalist Baptists like Kent.
Good point.
That's the wrong brand. I gotcha.
It may just be a preacher's number, but they're touting the 700 people being converted by Kent.
It's the 700 Club.
Yeah.
Hey, there you go, the prison edition.
And one of the other important angles to this whole story, since you're talking about the prison and religion issue, is that if I hadn't been hounding Peter J. Riley for the last 3 years, he probably never would have been able to get Jonathan Schwartz, the documentary filmmaker, to take his team to Pensacola to report on the trial and also work on developing a documentary. His last movie, I think, was just recently on PBS about faith behind bars.
Yes.
So he seems to be an ideal person to capture what went on during the trial and also add to it with his interviews and all the other stuff he does. It's out of my pay grade, but I think it's wonderful that it wound up getting him down there and working on that project.
Yeah, and I had never heard his name before I saw him show up on Riley's non-Forbes blog.
Mhm.
So, and I've been reading it, and thank you for those links, Robert. I really appreciate that. He's doing a really good job. Sometimes it's hard to follow his narrative, because I think what he's doing is he's posting it exactly as he writes it down in court.
Well, you have to be careful too. Jonathan sometimes will have an article Peter posts, and then part of the team involves two Pensacola journalism students.
Yes, and it's clear enough in my mind that I can follow it along. Sometimes it just has a tendency to skip from first person to third person, and it takes some getting used to. But once you figure out Jonathan's fitment in the narrative, then you can kind of grasp what he's talking about.
And I think part of that too has to do with the logistics. He's very busy, and he wants to get something posted, and so the editing and the details might be a little rough. So you have to look close to fully understand it.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, we've got the top of the hour here. So any other kind of pertinent details that fit into the story that we haven't covered yet, guys? We covered everything? Awesome.
I kind of got a... Go ahead, Dave.
Dave, go.
I wanted to ask both Robert and Dee this question. I have my own feelings on it. And I probably am a little more familiar with it than Heretic Woman and Beth. But Robert, how do you see the jury verdict playing out? And then Dee, same question for you.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, I think they would be hard-pressed not to return a guilty verdict. I understand there's a risk there. I don't think there's any reasonable possibility at all that they could vote 12-0 to acquit. So they either have to, in my opinion, have to bring back a unanimous guilty verdict somewhere on all the different charges. If they can figure it, I don't think there can be bifurcated. I think they stand or fall together, but they can do what they want. So they either have to bring back a guilty verdict or a hung jury, which makes the government have to make the decision on whether they want a do-over.
It's interesting you say that. I've served on a jury before, and the time that I did it, it was actually for a 2-part trial. We didn't know that going in, and the other jurors, I tried my best to get off that jury because I did not want to do it. But unfortunately, I got selected. The defendant told his attorney that he wanted me on the jury.
Oh no!
Oh no!
And that was and his attorney, who was a public defender, his attorney said that is a very, very bad idea. But the defendant was adamant to get me on the jury. Well, it was a bad idea because I wound up getting myself selected the jury foreperson. And in the end, we returned a unanimous verdict on both parts of this trial. He was guilty of the assault and the drug possession in the first part, and then he was guilty of being a habitual felon in the second part. And it was me and another guy who kind of led that charge because the guy was fucking guilty. and that's kind of how the Hovind case seems to be to me. Mm-hmm. One, he was guilty of structuring. We have the evidence. Two, there was a court order that said, "Don't do dumb shit."
Yeah, I think he missed that part.
What? No. 3, he was fully aware of it, and 4, he did the dumb shit anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So he is unequivocally guilty.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now, whether or not the jury lets their emotions weigh in on it is a completely different aspect. But as far as the physical evidence itself goes, the guy's guilty.
What's your take, Dee?
I'm one of these people. I don't want to second guess the jury. I think for sure Hansen is guilty of the charge, and I forget how how it's phrased, but he's guilty of not showing up for the grand jury. That one is a no-brainer. The guy had to be hauled in. I would hope that it's not so. The rest of it is not so complicated that the jury was misled, but it's hard to say. Again, wasn't in court. What we've gotten from people. I mean, good God, I hate listening to Rudy because he does not tell me the stuff I want to know, and even the reporters don't tell me the stuff I want to know, which is, what exhibits were put in and what did people testify and stuff like that. Those will have to wait for the transcript. Yeah. I am thinking that the government would not have brought the case had they did not think that they had a good case because, as Ken himself says, I mean, they win 98% of the time, and there's a reason for that. They don't bring cases that they don't think they're going to not win. So I am thinking that the government is probably did fine, and we'll see some sort of a guilty verdict on all of it. But again, I wasn't in the courtroom. I don't know. I'm not in the jury room with the jurors, so I don't know exactly what kind of discussion is going on. And for all we know, it could be like what happened last week at the Arias case, where they had 11 people who wanted her to die and one person who was just an absolute stubborn holdout and refusing to go along, and that hung the jury, and so she's going to get life.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see for sure.
I guess another thing to note too is that, as I understand it, if they do return a guilty verdict, we're not going to know the sentence for some time. They will reschedule a sentencing hearing and do a sentencing report and all that stuff. And I can't see 20 years, which the Hovind people have been promoting, 20 years to 100 years. It's like all the other cases. There is a textbook worst-case scenario, which nobody gets. And so they should be more realistic in trying to look at how a sentence might be formulated for Kent if he is found guilty.
What is he actually facing time-wise? I mean, the worst-case scenario. Is it...
Well, worst case would be 100 years or whatever they want to say if you stack everything up. But that in the first trial, I think some reports indicated that the worst-case scenario was like 250 years.
Mm-hmm.
He got 10.
Oh,
what a deal.
Shit.
Well, yeah, because they had a bunch of sentences, they had a bunch of charges running concurrently. That's what they did. And, you also need to look at they complain so bitterly about the structuring, but look at Joe. Joe is the person who did 99% of the structuring. She's the one that went into the bank every 3 times every 2 weeks or whatever it was and cashed those checks. She got a year on the 58 structuring counts.
Yeah.
Served maybe 9 months, I think.
Yeah. I mean, they gave her a year and a day so that she would she'd qualify for what do they call it? They let you serve 85% of the sentence or something like that.
Early release.
Yeah, early release. If they give you just a year, then you have to serve the entire sentence. It's weird that way. The flip side is if you serve a year and a day, you're a felon, as opposed to, less than a year. It's it's a misdemeanor.
Yeah.
Hold on. I didn't think that there were any crimes at the federal level that were misdemeanors.
There are.
Really?
There are. There's some misdemeanor counts. There aren't many, and it could. I don't know if those structuring charges could have been downgraded to a misdemeanor or not. I have no idea how that works out. I am thinking that had Kent and Joe been willing to compromise and set up a payment plan with the government and get themselves legal, that Joe might have gotten home confinement or probation even, but that didn't happen. Instead, she ended up going to prison.
This is something that I was thinking about, and this may be something for Dee to address. When you look at the total value, the market value of the properties and the assets that were seized, we're talking about what, $1.5 million, $2 million, maybe more.
I can't even say that. Hovind's people like to say, oh my gosh, this was worth, I mean, I've seen numbers up to $3 million. This is not in a really great part of Pensacola. I mean, if you look at a map, I mean, the house that Anthony Jaworski, the property that he bought, that's across the street from a pawn shop. We are not talking about a really super great part of town. In fact, I would say that even though I live in a kind of rundown part of Mesa, I live in a better part of town than the Hovinds do. That said, it is very near to Pensacola Christian College, which is an extremely conservative Baptist college. I mean, that makes BYU look like Party Central, without the alcohol, naturally, but it still makes BYU look just downright liberal and scandalous and all that. It's very close. It's within walking distance. I mean, less than half a mile. Now, one of the conspiracy theories that Rudy and friends have been pushing is that Pensacola Christian College wants that property. I mean, besides the fact, if you look at it on a map, you would have to say they have to go through certain properties to get to the Hovind compound.
Except for the Jaworski property.
Yeah, except for the Jaworski property. But see, the thing is that I checked. Florida does allow for a city to take property for the benefit of a private institution, and may actually, I didn't get this far into it because I said, okay, the city can take it and say that PCC can have it. They may let educational institutions on their own, whether private or public, do condemnation proceedings in eminent domain. So there's that. But the property is not worth $3 million. If it's worth $1 million, I'd be surprised.
Okay, but here's the thing. Let's just say it's worth $750,000.
Okay.
All the properties together. Yeah. When you look at the amount that the IRS was settling for, which was $430,000 and change.
Well, that isn't the IRS. That's a forfeiture for the structuring. That's the money. I mean, if you added all the structuring up, $400 is what the Hovind structured. That's the forfeiture. Okay, the judgment for the forfeiture. Separate from all of that is the $3 million and change that the Hovind, Kent and Joe owe in penalties, taxes, and penalties.
Okay.
And that's a civil action.
Okay, that's the piece of the puzzle that I must have been missing then, because what I was under the impression that the IRS had, of course, gone through due process and seized the properties and was taking the value of $430,000 and settling the claim at that value.
No.
Okay. All right.
That's a forfeiture, and it is due to the United States government, not specifically to the IRS, and it's strictly out of those structuring charges. That's why the Hovindicators get all upset about the structuring charges, because that's where the $400 money judgment comes in. Okay. And one thing again to keep in mind, and I mentioned this before you joined the call, is that Judge Rogers ordered in 2011 that when the government takes this property, wait, it was not 2011, it was 2009. In 2009, she ordered that, yes, they could take the property, but they can only sell it one piece at a time and, apply it to the $400. When they sold enough property to pay off that debt, then they were to turn back the rest of the property and anything over $430,400.
Okay, so when these properties were being purchased by people like Jaworski, and we know that Eric Hovind purchased another one of the properties for $40,000.
Well, so also did Marissa Dublin, who's a Hovind daughter.
Yes, she did.
Also purchased a property as well.
Right. So they're purchasing their properties back. These properties are going at auction. They're probably getting a pretty sweet deal. Even if you talk about a property that a developed property or an improved property that's worth $80,000. If you're getting it for $40,000, that's a pretty sweet deal. So Kent and Company are still making bank by buying these properties back.
Well, they are making bank, but they still, have to pay off the $400. And one thing to keep in mind about Eric is that he had purchased a property, or from whichever trust, I have no idea. It was one of the many trusts set up, and he'd made improvements on the house. He put $70,000 into it, and the government wanted to seize this. Well, he had done all this purchasing and everything in 2000, and so the government could not seize that property. That was the one win that the Hovinds have gotten out of this entire thing, is that Eric's house was deemed not to be part of any of this. And I agree with that judgment. I mean, the guy put in his own money. He paid the taxes. It was not in a trust. He was obviously, expending himself on it. It was not some weirdness with a trust name 55720 North Palafox.
I'm not so sure that transaction is all that clean. I've read that the $70,000 came from a loan from Kent.
It did.
And
I don't think it was
whether or not it
clean,
was
but
ever paid back is something entirely different.
right. I don't think it was completely clean, but I think it was a lot cleaner than the 19 Cummings Street Trust and the 14 Cummings Street Trust and all these other trusts that Kent have. I mean, he was, seriously.
The name of this trust I pulled out of my ass trust.
Yeah, pretty much.
That's what I was just thinking.
Who's coming? We need to.
That's
Yeah.
Oh man! Well, folks, we're nearing the end of the show, so we'll go through and give everybody a chance to wrap up. So, Beth, where do we find you and your lovely blog at?
Easiest place to find me is Twitter at Dune9999. Yeah, too many nines. 3 9s and an 8. And that's links to my blog, and that's Havoc and Chaos, and it's on Blogger.
Awesome. And Dave, other than Facebook jail, where do we find you?
I'm not in jail anymore.
Not anymore.
I think I know who did that.
Oh yeah.
And it was somebody from one of the lowest literacy rate areas in the third world, Florida's Panhandle.
Oh, lovely.
He was somebody who had been commenting on my page, and I think that he saw that picture. I did post it as public, and I shouldn't have done that. But whatever. But no, I'm no longer in Facebook jail. I am now out.
Good.
And I'm on parole, I guess.
I love that they asked you for your opinion on what Facebook.
What is your overall impression of Facebook? I think you're a bunch of fucking cunts.
But yes, you can usually find you on Facebook when you're not in jail.
You can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/dave.photo. You can find me on Twitter at davephoto with no dots. You can also find my newest project at facebook.com/Sneetle. That's SNEETLE. Sneetle is a fictitious character. He's a lightning bug who teaches biblical criticism, or textual criticism, I should say.
Yes.
And you can find me sometimes when somebody bothers to post them. Some of my essays and articles will show up on pathos.com from time to time.
Yes. Awesome. And Dee, do you have any things you like to plug or any closing remarks?
Well, I need to work on the page once we get a verdict of some sort, but I'd like to plug www.hovindology.com, which is going to be a center of all things Hovind legal. His 2006 trial. I've got documents from the other things he filed, the Bivens case. His tax deals, that sort of thing. And of course, I'm also with Robert, and he'll talk about that page. I'm an administrator on the Kent and Joe Hovind versus USA IRS Facebook page.
Awesome. And yes, Robert, where can we find you?
That was a pretty good lead-in. Most of what I do anymore is on that Facebook page, which is Kent Hovind and Joe Hovind versus USA IRS. You can search Facebook to come up with that. And I've also got a Yahoo discussion group. Since Yahoo has changed its whole format in recent years, it hasn't been as active. So the Facebook page is probably the preferable place to go. My other hobby involving the Ministerial Housing Allowance has seemingly run its course for now. So once Hovind wraps up, I may not have anything left to do.
Oh, dear.
Oh, good. You can come play with me.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't think we're going to get rid of Kent quite that easily.
I know.
I don't think so either. I think he's ours forever.
Well, let me just interject something here. I want to give my personal thanks to both Robert and Dee. We had talked about getting you guys together to do a show like this, and I really appreciate both of you taking the time to help educate a lot of the viewers out there as to what is actually going on with Kent Hovind in this ministry. So, from me personally, thank you both very much.
Yes.
Thank you. I really appreciate. I love talking about Kent. It's just funny. A lot of things. You've got your tax evasion. You've got your sovereign citizen nuttery. Those are the things that get me. But if you dig further, you've got fundamental Baptists. You've got young Earth creationism. I mean, there's a whole stew of crazy there that can be plumbed. I mean, just my part of it, which is just touching the legal stuff, is not even the beginning of Kent Hovind and the crazy.
Yeah.
Very true.
Awesome. And before we wrap up, too, I just want to plug my other show, which is My Secular Savior. We're going to be recording a new episode this week, so we're excited about that. We're going to talk about setting boundaries when you're trying to help other people so that you don't overstretch yourself. So that's mysecularsavior.com. And, of course,
I might have to listen to that one.
You and me both, girl. And I do want to say Miss Ashley sends her regrets, but she got dogged by her work, and she had to go take care of, oddly enough, some truckers in Florida. So
they're probably all on North Palafox Street.
They weren't named Rudy Davis.
Not that I'm aware of, but she did send a request. But she also told me that she was really appreciative. She'd been wanting to learn more about the whole Hovind hysterics, and she was really appreciative that she could learn from you guys. So
and I hate that she had to leave so early because all this is taking place in Florida, which is just south of Tampa.
Yes, that's right.
Actually, well, in this case, it's actually just south of Alabama.
Well, this is an inside joke.
Yeah, I'm gonna give Miss Ashley some credit here. There is a video which I now have a copy of, but it's on the No Religion Required Facebook page, and the video is of me sitting in a chair listening to Ashley read some kind of a report from one of her college classmates, and it's fucking awful.
Oh, it's ridiculous.
And this whole video is just me reacting to this, but the report that Ashley is reading is from a girl who said in this report that she is from Florida, which is just south of Tampa.
Oh, God.
Yeah. Oh, God. And this girl was enrolled in college.
Well, I find it quite funny and kind of ironic that one of the colleges that I almost chose was Pensacola Christian.
Ooh.
Yeah.
about 99% of the things I disagree with them about. The 1% is when Becca Horton, dropped a dime on Kent Hovind and turned him in for his income tax evasion. But the funny thing is that he was already on the IRS's radar.
Yeah.
They don't stick around about that kind of thing, man. You start doing shady deals, and they're going to find you. I know that, and I don't even live down there.
What was it? Peter Riley said in one of his blog, or one of the comments to one of his blog posts. He said, "Sometimes it's just better to pay the tax."
Yeah.
That's one of his principles.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right, folks. Well, as usual. Oh, and I was going to say, join us next week, where poor Beth, it's going to be Canadianified again. We're having Spencer Lucas, who is the founder and organizer of the Non-Conference for Non-Believers, which will be having our second year in Toronto this summer, featuring Lawrence Krauss. So he's going to come on the show and talk to us about that. If Beth's going, how can I get to Toronto in August?
Yes, I am.
Beth needs to make it to Hickory in late April.
Yes, she should, but we'll talk about that shortly. And as always, and this will be a first, Dave gets to listen to himself close out the show, as we do every week.
That's right.
Yes. We close out the show with Dave's own humanist creed, so let's hope my computer's a little faster this time. Come on. It's thinking. I need a new computer, folks. Soon. It takes it 10 years to decide it wants to play the video. Come on. See, I can edit this out. Well, I just put the slide up. Come on. A good thing is I can edit this out before I put it on iTunes.
but not before you put it on YouTube.
No, I know. I was going to say yay for life. Right? Oh, come on. See, it's because you're here now. It's like, well, Dave's here. Why do I have to play? Here we go. And share screen.
I know the truth and power of reason and of rational thinking, and I will use them to my advantage. I know the truth and power of educating and expanding my boundaries, and I will educate myself. I know the truth and power of vanquishing ignorance, and I will do so whenever the opportunity presents itself. I know the truth and power of morality without supervision, and of true and accurate righteousness. I know the truth and power of obliterating tyranny, be it intellectual, emotional, or philosophical, and will work toward that goal whenever and however possible. I know the truth and power of human ingenuity. I know the truth and power of human compassion, and I will be mindful of the welfare of others. I know the truth and power of equality and fairness for all living things. I know the truth and power of the importance of our families, our friends, and our fellow men and women. I know the truth and power of human stewardship of our lands, our waters, and our skies, and I will try to act to preserve our environment. I know the truth and power of the sciences of mathematics, of physics, and of chemistry, and of the important role of these disciplines in understanding the workings of this cosmos. I know the truth and power of the rejection of all notions or beliefs that reside in the supernatural or the superstitious, and of those notions or beliefs that we are not supposed to be able to explain. And I know that these rejections are necessary for humankind's survival. I am a human being with a free mind, liberated from irrational influence and from unreasonable dogma.